The night Claire Hastings finally stopped pretending she didn't see him, Nathan Reeves realized that some people spend years learning how to hide, and it only takes one sentence to make them stop. Nathan was 38 years old, owned a small furniture restoration business on the east side of town, and had spent the last 3 years living in the strange quiet that followed his divorce. It wasn't bitterness exactly, just the particular kind of tired that came from building a life with someone who decided halfway through that they'd rather have the idea of adventure than the reality of Tuesday nights. His ex-wife, Amanda, had moved to Portland with a photographer she'd met at a gallery opening. Nathan had kept the house, the workshop, and the oddly specific habit of eating dinner standing up at the kitchen counter because sitting at the table alone felt worse. His younger sister Jenna had made it her personal mission to drag him back into what she called normal human interaction, which apparently meant showing up at her place every other Sunday for dinner with her husband, their 2 kids, and whoever else she decided to invite. For the last 8 months, that whoever had been Claire Hastings, Jenna's best friend since college. Claire was a graphic designer who worked from home, wore oversized cardigans that always looked like they belonged to someone taller, and had perfected the art of being warmly present with everyone in the room except Nathan. She'd smile at Jenna's husband, laugh at the kids' terrible jokes, help clear plates, and somehow manage to look directly through Nathan as if he were a particularly unremarkable piece of furniture. He'd noticed it the first time she came to dinner. She'd shaken his hand, said something polite about Jenna mentioning his work, and then spent the rest of the evening performing an impressive act of selective blindness. When he passed her the salad, she thanked the air 6 inches to his left. When he asked if she wanted more wine, she answered while studying the ceiling. It should have been funny. Instead, it lodged itself somewhere uncomfortable in his chest and stayed there. It was mid-October when everything shifted. Jenna had organized what she kept calling a casual Sunday gathering, which in practice meant 14 people crammed into her dining room with too much food and not enough chairs. Nathan had arrived late because a client had called about a warped cabinet door, and by the time he walked in, the house smelled like roasted chicken, and someone had already opened the expensive wine Jenna's husband had been saving. Claire was standing near the kitchen island, holding a glass of red wine and listening to Jenna's neighbor describe her recent kitchen renovation with the kind of polite attention that suggested she was mentally somewhere else entirely. She was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that kept sliding off one shoulder, and her hair, which was usually pulled back, was loose and longer than Nathan had realized. When he walked past her to set down the bottle of scotch he'd brought, she glanced up, met his eyes for exactly half a second, and then looked away so quickly it felt like a door slamming shut. Dinner was loud and chaotic in the way Jenna's dinners always were. Someone's kid spilled juice on the tablecloth. Jenna's husband told a story about a disastrous camping trip that had everyone laughing. Nathan sat at the far end of the table, across from Claire, who spent the entire meal in animated conversation with the person beside her while executing the same careful avoidance she'd been practicing for months. At one point, Jenna asked Nathan about a project he'd just finished, and when he answered, Claire's gaze flickered toward him and then away again, like she'd touched something hot. After dinner, Nathan volunteered to help clean up, mostly because it gave him something to do with his hands. The kitchen was warm and smelled like rosemary and browned butter. He was rinsing plates at the sink when he heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Claire standing in the doorway, holding a stack of dessert plates and looking like she was deciding whether to come in or retreat. She walked to the counter and set the plates down without saying anything. For a moment, they worked in silence, the sound of running water and distant laughter from the dining room filling the space between them. Nathan loaded the dishwasher. Claire wiped down the counters. It felt almost normal, except for the fact that she was standing on the opposite side of the kitchen as if there were an invisible boundary she couldn't cross. Finally, Nathan turned off the water and dried his hands on a towel. He leaned against the counter and looked at her directly. She was scrubbing the same spot on the granite for the 3rd time, her shoulders tense. He said her name, just once, quietly. Claire. She stopped moving. Her hand went still on the counter, and for a long moment, she didn't look up. When she finally did, her expression was something Nathan couldn't quite name. Frustrated, maybe, or tired, or both. She set the sponge down and crossed her arms over her chest, and then she said the thing that changed everything. I can't keep doing this. Nathan didn't move. He wasn't sure what she meant, but something in her voice made it impossible to look away. Doing what? He asked. Her jaw tightened. She glanced toward the doorway as if checking that no one was coming, and then she looked back at him, and this time she didn't look away. Pretending I don't notice you, she said. Her voice was low and steady, but there was an edge to it, something sharp and honest that hadn't been there before. Pretending I don't think about the fact that you're in the room. Pretending it doesn't bother me that you're kind and you're funny and you fixed my sister's bookshelf without being asked and you never once made me feel like I had to explain myself. Nathan felt something click into place like a piece of wood settling into a joint. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion in the way she was holding herself, like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Why? He asked finally. Why pretend? Claire let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't sounded so tired. Because Jenna spent 2 years telling me how hard your divorce was. Because I didn't want to be the friend who made things complicated. Because every time I thought about saying something, I remembered that you've been through enough, and you probably don't need some mess of a person showing up in your life and making it worse. Nathan straightened and took a step closer. He kept his voice calm, the same tone he used when he was explaining a repair to a client who didn't know wood could be saved. What makes you think you'd make anything worse? Claire's eyes went bright, not with tears exactly, but something close. She shook her head. You don't know me, Nathan. You don't know that I spent 6 months in a relationship with someone who told me I was too much and then too little depending on the day. You don't know that I haven't had dinner with my own family in 2 years because they still think I should go back to him. You don't know that half the time I show up here I'm pretending I'm fine when I'm really just tired of feeling like I have to earn the right to take up space. Nathan didn't look away. He let the words settle between them, heavy and real, and then he said, I know you show up. I know you're good to my sister. I know you laugh at bad jokes and you're terrible at hiding when you're uncomfortable and you've been going out of your way not to look at me for 8 months, which means you've been thinking about it the whole time. Claire stared at him. For a second he thought she might turn around and walk out, but instead she laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, and when it was over she looked at him like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. You're not supposed to say things like that, she said. Nathan shrugged. Why not? Because it makes it real, she said quietly. And if it's real, then I have to figure out what to do about it. Nathan took another step forward, close enough now that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the way her sweater had slipped off her shoulder again. He said, You could start by looking at me at dinner once in a while. Maybe say something when I pass you the bread. Take it slow. Claire's mouth twitched, almost a smile. That's your advice? Take it slow. Nathan held her gaze. I restore furniture for a living. Everything I do is slow. It's the only way to do it right. Claire looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, What if I don't want to go slow? Nathan felt the air shift between them, something unspoken clicking into alignment. He didn't move. He let her decide, and then Claire stepped forward, closed the space between them, and kissed him. It wasn't careful. It wasn't slow. It was the kind of kiss that tasted like frustration and relief in equal measure, like someone finally saying the thing they'd been holding back for too long. Nathan's hand found the small of her back, and Claire's fingers curled into the front of his shirt, and for a few seconds the kitchen and the noise from the other room disappeared entirely. When they pulled apart, Claire was breathing hard, her forehead resting against his. She said, I'm still a mess. Nathan said, I have a workshop full of broken furniture. I'm used to mess. She laughed, and this time it sounded like something unlocking. They stood there in the warm kitchen, the sound of Jenna's voice drifting in from the dining room, and Nathan realized that he hadn't felt this steady in years. Claire looked up at him, her expression softer now, and said, Jenna's going to lose her mind. Nathan smiled. Probably. Worth it, though. Claire didn't answer right away, but she didn't let go of his shirt either, and that felt like answer enough. From the doorway, Jenna's voice cut through the moment. Nathan, did you find the... She stopped mid-sentence. Nathan and Claire turned at the same time, still standing close enough that there was no pretending this was anything other than what it was. Jenna's eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words and failing spectacularly. Finally, she pointed at them, then at the doorway, then back at them. Is this... Did I just... Her husband appeared behind her, took one look at the scene, and started laughing. Jenna smacked his arm without looking at him, her gaze still locked on Nathan and Claire. How long? She demanded. How long has this been a thing? Claire bit her lip, clearly trying not to smile. About 3 minutes. Jenna blinked. 3 minutes. Nathan nodded. Give or take. Jenna looked at her husband, who was still grinning, then back at them. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and then said, You know what? I'm not even mad. I'm calling it. I'm taking credit for this. I brought you together. This is my victory. Claire raised an eyebrow. You spent 8 months seating us at opposite ends of the table. Jenna waved a hand dismissively. Strategic positioning. It built tension. You're welcome. Nathan caught Claire's eye and they both started laughing. Jenna narrowed her eyes at them, then shook her head and turned to leave, muttering something about never doubting her matchmaking instincts. Her husband gave them a thumbs up and followed her out. The kitchen was quiet again. Claire turned back to Nathan, her cheeks still flushed. So, she said, that happened? Nathan nodded. That happened? She smiled. What now? Nathan reached for her hand. Now we go back out there, sit through dessert, and pretend your sister didn't just catch us kissing in her kitchen. And then maybe tomorrow I take you to dinner. Somewhere that's not my sister's house. Claire's smile widened. I'd like that. Nathan squeezed her hand once, then let go, and they walked back into the dining room together. 6 months later, Nathan was standing in his workshop on a Saturday morning, planing the surface of a walnut table he'd been restoring for a client, when Claire walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing one of his old flannels over her jeans. She set his coffee on the workbench, leaned against the table he was working on, and watched him for a moment. You know, she said, I used to think you were intimidating. Nathan looked up, surprised. Intimidating how? She shrugged. Quiet. Steady. Like you had everything figured out. Nathan laughed. I was eating cereal for dinner 3 times a week when we met. Claire grinned. Yeah, but you made it look dignified. They spent the rest of the morning in the workshop, Claire sketching designs for a logo redesign while Nathan worked through the walnut's stubborn grain. At some point, she looked up from her tablet and said, Jenna wants us to come to dinner next Sunday. Nathan glanced over. Are we still letting her take credit for us? Claire smiled. Always. It makes her so happy. Nathan set down the plane and crossed the workshop to where she was sitting. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Then we'll go. A year after that, Nathan asked Claire to marry him in the same kitchen where she'd cornered him and told him she couldn't keep pretending. It was a Sunday afternoon. Jenna and her family were in the dining room, oblivious and loud, and Nathan had pulled Claire aside on the pretense of needing help finding something in the pantry. He'd kept the ring in his jacket pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and when Claire turned to ask him what they were looking for, he just took it out and held it up. She stared at it, then at him, and then she started laughing and crying at the same time and said yes before he'd even asked the question out loud. Jenna found them 30 seconds later, still standing in the kitchen, and screamed loud enough that the entire house went silent. Nathan looked at Claire, who was still holding his hand and grinning through tears, and thought that sometimes the best things in life happened because someone finally stopped pretending and said what they meant. So here's the question. What would you have done if someone you cared about had been avoiding you for months, and one day they finally told you why? And have you ever felt like you had to hide how you felt because you didn't want to complicate someone else's life? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.